They are a tall race, clad in close-fitting garments with a belt encircling the waist. They hurl their axes and cast their spears with great force, never missing their aim. They manage their shields with great skill, rushing on their enemies so fast they seem to fly more rapidly than their javelins.
Greetings, I'm the blacksmith and welcome to my forge. Now today we're going to be discussing something that I think has been somewhat undersurfaced in the historical conversation. So let's just hypothetically say I was to tell you that modern day France owes its name to a rather small throwing axe with a peculiarly shaped head. Well, you might for instance say, blacksmith, listen, think you need to get some fresh air, think that forge's fumes are getting to your head. Or the mighty scholar among you might say, listen blacksmith, I saw that France was literally in the name of the weapon we're about to discuss, so let's just get on with it, shall we? And so let me just introduce to you to Francesca. So this strange little axe right here is what we call a Francesca. And they're very easy to recognize by the long curve of the axe head and how it terminates into a sudden and pronounced tip. Now presumably this tip would have helped it bite into shields or punch through armor when thrown, but we're not gonna examine the axe just yet. Instead, let's try and understand the setting that it was used in first. Now the Francesca really rose to prominence when used by the Franks during the Merovingian dynasty from 500 to 750 AD, and then all the way into the reign of Charlemagne from 768 to 814 AD. And trust me, we will be talking in detail about Charlemagne, probably sooner than later, but that's a story for another time. Now we shouldn't think that our little axe here was exclusively used by the Franks. Now other examples have been found elsewhere in Germany and in Britain as well, but the Franks were definitely its most prolific users. And as a result, it just kind of became their iconic weapon, much like the gladius and the scutum would have become to the Romans, the khopesh to the Egyptians before them, and of course in the modern day the katana is to weeps all around the world. So really, the Francesca only comes into use at the start of the 6th century. And this new age starts off in the wake of the Western Roman Empire's collapse. This left a huge power gap in Western Europe. It's kind of as this, like imagine the US simply just vanishing from the earth and just everyone else just scrambling to fill in its place. And that's exactly what the Germanic tribes did. They just started carving up the carcass of this once great empire. Initially divided into small kingdoms, however, the Franks would soon be united as Clovis I conquered, allied and schemed his way into becoming the ruler of most of modern-day France. He united the Frankish tribes. That's not to say, however, they always remained united. Most of the time there would be at least 2 or even 3 kings at the helm of France, and this would last all the way until the reign of Charles the Bold in 875 AD. Obviously though, the transition from Germanic tribe to the biggest power in Western Europe did not come bloodless. And so, all of you pacifists might be wondering, when are we gonna get to the exciting stuff? How did they kill their enemies? And luckily for you, and for me, we have some really solid contemporary sources that recorded in great detail exactly how they would fight. And one such account reads as this.
Under the leadership of Tudibert, the Franks marched into Italy. They had a small body of cavalry about their leader, and these were the only ones armed with spears, while all the rest were foot soldiers having neither bows nor spear. Each man carried a sword, a shield and an axe. Now the iron head of this weapon was thick and exceedingly sharp on both sides, while the wooden handle was very short. And they are accustomed always to throw these axes at one signal in the first charge, and thus to shatter the shields of the enemy and kill them.
However, another account, which comes from Aegatius, and I'm just gonna assume that I'm pronouncing that correctly because Italian names are hard, but it seems to contradict this slightly when it comes to the equipment used by the Franks.
Military equipment of these people is very simple. They do not serve on horseback, except in very rare cases. Fighting on foot is both habitual and a natural custom, and they are proficient in this. At the hip they wear a sword, and on the left side their shield is attached. They have neither bows nor slings, no missile weapon except a double-edged axe, and the angon, which they use more often. The angons are spears which are neither very short nor very long. They can be used if necessary for throwing like a javelin and also in hand-to-hand combat. The greater part of the angon is covered with iron and very little wood is exposed. Above, at the socket of the spear, some points are turned back, bent like hooks, and turned towards the handle.
They do, however, have a common thread, and that is that the Franks would fight in aggressive infantry formations. They would march up to the enemy shield wall, throw a single volley of heavy missiles before engaging in hand-to-hand combat. And this echoes the tactics that the ancient Romans would use, throwing their pilum to kill the enemy or to make their shields unusable, before once again engaging with their gladius. However, to the 6th century Romans, this would have been a complete shock, and indeed a cursory glance at the angons revealed to be very similar to the old Roman pilum. But then, what about the Francesca? Now I find it first of all rather unlikely that a throw would outright destroy a shield. Perhaps it would cut into some shield arms when it punches through the wooden barrier. And as we mentioned, this may have been the purpose of the pronounced tip on the axe head. However, both the channel Lindybeige and Taintrand, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, man, but I'll links in the description for both, noted a very interesting secondary feature about the Francesca. And it's one that it would have over the angon, and that is that it bounces. And it doesn't just bounce a little bit, it's basically just a sharp bouncy ball that wants to cut your head off. But, you know, keeping in mind that a lot of the initial energy would have been lost on impact with the ground, you can probably see how 1,000 axes bouncing around through your formation might have somewhat of an effect on the cohesion of your unit. And I am fumbling my lines even though I pre-scripted it. But, you know, I'll leave it in, so, you know, this video will feel organic or something. Now, it would also seem that the angon was reserved for the wealthier warriors, and not just the common man. We can deduce this easily from archaeological grave finds, where angons were almost always exclusively found where other high-status symbols would have been found, such as double-edged swords. And for those who watched the Sudden Who video, as I discussed there, double-edged swords at this time were very much a status symbol, as the common man's weapon would be the sax. And that is also probably why the Francesca would have become the characteristic weapon of the Frankish warrior, as it would have been used by both the rich and poor warriors alike. But why then was the Francesca cheaper than the angon? Well, first of all, we can quite logically deduce that a Francesca could still have some utility as a tool, whereas an angon is strictly a weapon. Because let's look at the angon top down, for example, and now compare it to a felling axe. You can see how the profile is pretty much identical. That's not to say that an angon would be particularly great at cutting trees, its handle is way too short for that. But it would be pretty well suited for cutting things like branches or maybe even splitting logs. I'd be really interested in seeing a test by that. On top of that, its construction is really rather simple, which would likely make it affordable for most, save just the poorest of militia. You can see how simple its construction is really. You simply have to bang out the shape in iron and punch a hole through for the shaft. A rather easy feat for most skilled blacksmith, I'm sure. It's unclear though if the shaft would be slid up from the bottom and kept in place by centrifugal force, kind of like the tomahawks would, or if it would be slid up top down and then hammered in a wedge to keep it secure. Now for my Francesca here, I went with the latter option, so it being slid up and held in place with a wedge. Also opted to add a forged welded cutting edge, which would have been perfectly feasible to have been created with the technology available at the time. However, full disclosure, I have not actually seen any examples of Francescas with forged welded edges. It is merely an aesthetic addition on my part. Also, my haft, and the haft of the axe, get your mind out of the gutter, is 36 centimeters long, and it's slightly curved. This kind of echoes the axe handle of a tomahawk, which is, well, really the only modern equivalent that we could relate it to. And now I want to kind of echo the beginning of the video again, and I would pose the question to you. Why do you think the Franks were called the Franks? Well, to me it does not seem very unlikely that, just like the Saxons and the Longobards, they may have been named after their iconic weapons. Now, I'm sure that we will never know for certain if the chicken will have preceded the egg or vice versa, but I really like to think that the country of France owes its name to a rather tiny axe that completely changed the face of Europe. Now, just like last time, you will be able to pick up the model, the textures, renders of the axe all on my Gumroad page. You can use them for whatever you want, put them in your games, put them in your mods, use them for your role-playing games, whatever you can think of, feel free. And also I would really like at the end here to thank two of my friends that pitched in for this video. First is the Great Harlequin, who you can often find over on Twitch playing board games. And second is my buddy Tom, who I commissioned to create my newest piece of background art for the channel. Links to both of their relevant pages will be in the description below. And with all that said, I really hope you enjoyed. Thank you for making it all the way through the video. And please let me know what do you think of the Francesca and what other weapons would you like to see discussed. And I will gladly see you in the next one. Bye bye.